right, Think Twice fans, we are back again. What I'm doing today is I'm going to try to do a short, I know I'm bad at that, deck tech over one of the new decks I'm playing in Modern, okay? This is a little bit of almost a budget consideration. If you check out the Moxfield link that's in the description of the video, you can see that this deck, if you have to buy it from scratch, costs less than $500, which is kind of budget-ish range in Modern. A lot of that actually comes from just a few cards, really, and a lot of it is just some of these lands really ramp up the cost of the deck. So if you already have some cards, a lot of the pieces of this deck are actually very, very cheap. Okay, most of the cost is in just a handful of cards. So here's the thing. So what this deck is, as you can tell by the title, this is blue-black Eldrazi. So the idea for me for this deck started actually with an Aspiring Spike deck. He plays the like mono black mid range with Kozilek's Command. And this kind of started there and took on its own evolution to kind of match my playstyle a little bit. So this is kind of a mashup between his mono black Kozilek's Command mid-range deck and a mono blue Eldrazi deck he runs, because he and I are both fans of Elder Deep Fiend, and so I've wanted to play that card, so this is the way to make it work. So what I've done is I've organized the deck into a few categories that I want to talk through really quickly, okay? I'm going to start with the mana base, because this is the first place that is often the question in something like an Eldrazi deck, because really you're a 3-color deck. Even though it's called blue-black, you have to have the colorless mana for things like Kozilek's Command and Thought-Knot Seer. Okay? And Kozilek's Command is kind of the center of the whole deck. So you have to make sure you can produce enough colorless mana, but then because you can also see I'm running blue cards that require blue and black, that I also need that mana. So what you'll see down here is the mana base. I know this spot right here is a little glary, so I'll move things around as we go. So I've separated the mana base into a few different categories as well. You have 24 lands. One, because that's the best way to get enough sources, but also you actually have a lot of things that require a decent amount of mana. You can see the curve isn't super low, but also you have cards that just get better when you have access to more mana, namely Kozilek's Command. A lot of the stuff in this deck revolves around this card. So I'm going to start with kind of what I think is the least important to the most important section of cards. So we'll start with, you do have a few basics. One thing you have to keep in mind when you're running an Eldrazi style deck is that people are going to attack your mana base, and often the things that they do to attack it are like destroy a land effects that let you go get a basic. So you want to be able to cover your basics. The waste is especially important in those cases, so you're not cut off from some of your colorless spells. Okay, so 4 basics just to kind of cover your bases there, run things that way. So we covered the basics. Next is just what I'll call the duels, is how I separated them. So you've got some just classic blue-black duels. You get 2 water graves and an Undercity Sewers, just to cover those. Next, not surprising, is 4 polluted delta, so you can go find these cards that we just mentioned. Just helps with that fixing, increases the colored sources count of all these cards. Okay. Next, the interesting duels are Ifnir Deadlands and Ipnu Rivulets. So instead of being a blue-black duel, they are lands that can tap for colorless, or you pay a life and they give you either blue or black mana. So they are now a colorless and color duel that you can have. So they help you out in that way. So those are your duels. The next most important category of lands is your colorless powerhouse lands, is what I'm going to say. So right now I've got 1 Ugin's Labyrinth in the deck, mostly because I own one. I originally didn't have any, and then I went to my card store at my local card store yesterday, and they had one, so I picked it up. But just can tap for 2 mana. A lot of the times you have, 9 different things that you can imprint under it, so that's a decent number, especially for only having 1. The real one that you need to worry about for this kind of build is Eldrazi Temple, because it taps for 2 colorless for all of your Eldrazi spells, of which you have a few. Most notably, that means if you have 1 Eldrazi Temple, you have covered the double colorless requirement for Kozilek's Command. Very simple. That's what you want it for. There it is. Okay. The final category of lands is the one that I think makes this kind of build possible at all, and that is your tri land. So the classic pain lands. In this case, Underground River. Taps for colorless, or taps for a blue or a black mana, but it deals a damage to you. So very similar to the Ipnu Rivulet and Ifnir Deadlands, but these are representing all three of the colors in your deck. They make fixing quite doable. Now you will notice between the Underground Rivers, the Deadlands, the Rivulets, and then your fetches and shocks, you do actually have a decent number of ways to deal damage to yourself, which is one of the downsides of playing this version of a deck like this compared to maybe more classic Eldrazi builds, because they normally don't deal much damage to themselves with their lands. This one will. We have made a couple considerations of that. But you might fetch shock once. So, you're kind of working there, but it is, to me, I see it as a necessary evil in order to play this kind of deck. Okay, but so that's the mana base. Should get us out of there really quickly. Next, in the main deck, we're going to talk about a few of the things. Once again, I'm trying to make this one shorter than usual. We're aiming for like a little bit under what we normally do. Okay, so I'll start with this pile of cards right here. This is what I just called the pure interaction. You notice that is the black portion of the deck. It's what I felt is lacking in a mono blue version. You start with 4 Thoughtseize. Just is going to be able to buy you that little bit of time, take away the really important things your opponent has going on, so you can get to your more powerful late game that we'll talk about. Same kind of thing. 4 Fatal Push. Stop those aggressive starts. Get rid of those pesky early creatures. You do have a few ways that you can also trigger Revolt, so it will hit 4s decently often, maybe not quite as often as you might be used to, but it is certainly doable. So 4 Fatal Push, just stop those early things. And I'm running 1 Cling to Dust, partially just because it's another way to keep digging and gives you something to do with what you often have lots of mana because you're a 24 land deck, but also because it offsets the life cost of some of those lands that we talked about. It's a way just to gain a little bit of life in the deck so that you can kind of keep going. So that's just your interaction suite. Next, I'm going to talk about this pile of cards. You notice these are the cards that require blue mana no matter what. And I call these the self-enablers. All right. The first one I'm going to talk about is Hope Ender Coatl. This is an MH3 card. It's 2 and a blue for a devoid Eldrazi snake. It has flash and flying for a 2/2. That's all whatever. It also has when you cast the spell, counter target spell an opponent controls unless they pay 1. This is important because it's one of the few ways you have to interact, but it also does a couple of other things. So when you pair it with either, got to flip through now, an Eldrazi Temple or your Ugin's Labyrinth, which can tap for 2 mana, this is active on turn 2. So if you go blue source into Eldrazi Temple, you have Hope Ender Coatl active on turn 2, which makes it that much better. Okay. The reason why this is in the self-enabler category, though, is because it also is going to enable Elder Deep Fiend, because you need to just have enough things to emerge out of to reduce the cost of Deep Fiend to do the Deep Fiend things that we'll talk about here in a minute. So that's why it's in there. It's not pure interaction. If you didn't have the Deep Fiend in the deck, you would not play this card. This card is generally subpar, but sometimes Force Spike just gets there, especially when you can play it a little bit of a turn early. Okay. The other nice thing about many of these Eldrazi cards is their abilities are on cast, not on resolution. So even if the Hope Ender Coatl is countered, that you can still counter the spell. So there's that. Next, we have Dress Down. Dress Down also kind of fits in partially interactive, partially self-enable. You're running Null Drifter, so if you play Dress Down on your opponent's end step, then go to your turn, you can cast Null Drifter for its evoke cost, draw 2 cards, but then you do not sacrifice it at the end. So super useful there. It also then shuts down some opponent's things, lots of ETB triggers, stuff like that. You just put this into play in response. Their creature doesn't do what they want it to do, and you get to replace it at cantrips. So very useful card. The other reason this is an enabler is it's an enchantment that puts itself in the graveyard, because so we're not running Urza's Saga, which gives you 1 more type for your Emrakul, the Promised End. Okay, the last self-enabler is, well, also serves double duty. Consigned to Memory. I don't really need to talk much about this card. It's all over everywhere, but you can use this to also as another way to counter the evoke trigger on your null drifters. You can use it to stop the Thought Knot Seer trigger if your opponent kills it where they get to draw a card. You can say, no, never mind, I'll deny you the card. It also is just good and interactive. Okay. Next is you have your big end game threat, which is Emrakul, the Promised End. You should be familiar with this card in Modern. When it's normally 13 mana for a 13/13 flying trample protection from instants. You reduce its cost by 1 for each type you have in the yard. You can get up to 6 types in the main deck of this deck. You can add artifact as well from the sideboard, so you could potentially have 7 in some games. So that reduces it, plus Eldrazi Temple and stuff make it even better. And this is kind of like the game has gone a little bit long. This is my haymaker, slam the door, finish the game. Okay. Because it allows you to control your opponent's next turn, so you use their own stuff to devastate them, and then you fly across the finish line. Okay. Next are your threat package. We're going to start with Thought Knot Seer. So Thought Knot Seer is an Oath of the Gatewatch card, 3 and a colorless. It is one of 2 cards that require colorless mana in this deck. And when it comes in, you get to exile any card you want out of their hand that's not a land. And then it's a 4/4. When it leaves, your opponent draws a card. But the idea is, once again, with things like Ugin's Labyrinth and Eldrazi Temple, sometimes this comes down early. Basically, the theme of the deck is that if you draw an Eldrazi Temple, you supercharge your deck. So you go from, decent cards to really good cards because they all come down faster. So then this becomes, you can actually cast Thought Knot Seer on turn 2 if you draw 2 of your Ugin's Labyrinth Eldrazi Temple combination. And like a 4/4 that takes away a spell out of their hand on turn 2 is really pretty good. So we have 4 of those as just a good solid threat that also interacts. A lot of double duty being played in this deck. Next, you have Null Drifter. I've already mentioned it a couple of times. 4/4 Flying Annihilator 1. When you cast it, you draw 2 cards and you can evoke. And so instead of paying the normal 7, you can evoke for 2 and a blue. So you can combine this with, like I've already mentioned, the Dress Down or the Consign to Memory. But this is now the way you kind of dig through the deck, find cards, and this is also one of your best things to emerge your Elder Deep Fiend into. Okay. The crux of the deck for me comes down, the thing that really is going to make me enjoy it is the Elder Deep Fiends. This is a card that came out in, what is this, Eldritch Moon? Yeah, Eldritch Moon. And so it's an 8 mana 5/6 flash. When you cast it, you tap up to 4 target permanents. And you can emerge it for 5 blue. And so what emerge is you can cast it by sacrificing a creature. You reduce the cost of paying this by that creature's now called mana value. So for instance, you can cast your Null Drifter for 3 but reduce Elder Deep Fiend by 7, gets you down to just blue, so then this becomes a 2 mana card. The play pattern you run into with playing this deck and this card is that you put down some good threats or do things, and then your opponent goes to their turn, and in their upkeep, you're going to flash in Elder Deep Fiend. You're going to tap down maybe their lands, maybe their troublesome creatures that they've gotten into play that you don't have answers to, and so it's kind of like a time walk on a 5/6 body. So then you have this to attack with the next turn, and the idea is sometimes you can end up chaining Elder Deep Fiend into Elder Deep Fiend, either emerging off of your previous Deep Fiend, maybe you have other things, Hope Ender Quaddles are great to do this into, or eventually sometimes you just get enough mana you can just hard cast it for 8, because every Eldrazi Temple also counts as 2, so that makes it a lot more doable. And so you kind of use this as your way to be like, okay, I'm just going to make it so, okay, you don't get to do anything this turn, I get to swing in, and then you don't get to do anything the next turn, I get to swing in, as the way to kind of finish out the game. Very fun card, in my opinion, that I haven't really gotten to play with much in my Magic career, but this card has always really intrigued me, so I'm finally taking the opportunity to play it. The deck really revolves around Kozilek's Command. By far the most powerful card in the deck. If this card did not exist, the deck would not be able to function. This card is just absolutely insane. It is classic command, so you have 4 options. You choose 2. This one has, you can create X, so it's colorless colors X, so they all deal with the value of X. You can create X Eldrazi spawns that sack and add colorless mana. That allows you to do some big chains into stuff here. You get to scry X, then draw. exile a creature mana value X, or exile up to X cards from graveyard. So very flexible, lets you be highly interactive. There are a lot of times that you go and on your opponent's end step, you simply cast this for the first two modes. I'm going to make a bunch of spawns, and I'm going to scry and then draw a card. And so you can kind of set up these draws where it's like, okay, I'm going to set myself up to have 1 billion mana on the next turn, and I know what the two cards I'm going to draw. Because like, okay, I'm scrying 7. I want this one and this one. So you draw one for there, you go to your turn, you draw the next one, and you kind of just do insane things. And then you can maybe chain them into each other. And so your first one, you spend all your mana, and okay, X is 3, but then the next one is even more because you have the spawns from the first one, and they kind of keep going, and it allows you to dig for some of these big threats that you're looking for, namely when you get to Emrakul the Promised End. When you're ready to finish the game, you can dig for it. You also create the mana for it. So Kozilek's Command is the crux of the deck. It is the whole reason why it works. This card is nuts. If you draw 1 in a game and you get to play it, your chances of winning are pretty good. If you play 2, you should be favored in the game. If you play 3, I don't know how you lose. Now, obviously, you can lose, but like the card is just that good. The more of them you cast in a game, like your chances of winning go up exponentially. So that's the main idea of the deck, is kind of just interact early, use the powerful effects of the Eldrazi combined with Eldrazi Temple, kind of making them cheaper, and then find one of two ways to end the game. Either your Elder Deep Fiend kind of time walking your opponent, or you just find your Emrakul and you cast it. So lots of fun interaction and things like that. Sideboard, pretty simple. I've got 1 Engineered Explosives and 2 Hurkyl's Recall and 1 Toxic Deluge for kind of just dealing with a large swath of go wide things. Engineered Explosives, Toxic Deluge can be good against Boros Energy or whatever. Hurkyl's Recall, obviously good against Affinity. All 4 decent against Affinity, so you can do those. I've got the other 2 Consigns because you kind of just need them. 2 Spell Pierces. Spell Pierce feels decent right now. Lots of different spell things you can counter, that sort of thing. Just because free spells are all over the place. Run some Vexing Baubles, also good against Affinity, good against Solitude. Stops the rebound half of Ephemerate. Ideas there, all that sort of stuff. You've got a little bit of removal in a Shoot the Sheriff and a Murderous Cut, along with 2 Wasteland Stranglers. The other reason why this card is good, because it has this ability, when it enters, you put a card from an opponent owns an exile into their graveyard, and then you get to -3 a creature. But you can do this to, let's say they have a creature on Warp. You can take it from the exile, put it into their graveyard, and they don't have it available for Warp anymore. So you're kind of setting yourself up for that. And then just a little bit of kind of fight against a few things a little different ways. 1 Graveyard Trespasser. Now, obviously, and I probably say this in every time I go through a deck, the sideboard is a little bit of flavor to taste. Whatever you like or you feel you need to be able to fight against in whatever you're coming up against in your local metagame is certainly doable. Okay? You get to make some fun tokens. Eldrazi spawns, day-night, everybody's favorite mechanic. Okay? The thing that I think is really cool about this idea of this deck's built around Kozilek's Command, but not just being all in on classic Eldrazi things, is... Sorry, I dropped a card, and I'm trying to find it. Is that you can actually do a bunch of different versions of the deck. So you always put Eldrazi Temple in. But then, with lands like Ifnir Deadlands, Ipnu Rivulet, and Underground River, if you look at these cycles, they actually allow you to play this in multiple different color combinations. Because there's one of these for each color, and there's one of these for each color pair. So you could actually kind of shift this and be like, oh, I want to run mono red, and I'm going to run Eldrazi Temple, Ramunap Ruins. You can even then have one of these other pain lands in if you want, to have more colorless sources, and like you can then figure out all of these different ways. One of the fun things you get to do with the monocolored versions is you can run like Field of Ruin and Demolition Field effects, and that allows you to have more colorless sources, but also have another way to fight against other decks by just continually destroying their lands. Like I'm going to build a mono red version that has Cleansing Wildfire and Price of Freedom in it, along with Field of Ruin, Eldrazi Temple, and you can just you're just going to destroy so much stuff that maybe they just can't cast spells, and eventually you'll find something to get the job done, right? So we're going to see those types of things in here, which is really nice, and I think it's just a cool, interesting, budget-ish idea to be able to say, I want to play some of these powerful things, but I don't necessarily just want to be all in on the classic sort of, where Tron has evolved to deck. And so you can run it a little bit of a different way, which is a little bit closer to my playstyle and something I like. So that's just the idea. Just wanted to give you a quick run through the deck. And hopefully if this kind of thing sparks your interest, you gain something out of it. So really appreciate everybody watching. Like I said, trying to keep this one short and sweet. Get through it fast. Everybody enjoy your Thanksgiving. Unless you're watching this not on the dates posted, then I hope you enjoyed your Thanksgiving, because I'm posting this Thanksgiving. See you, everybody.